that's a good opportunity to sort of dive into a little bit of the differences that I've come across. So every time we come across a humic or fulvic product, we buy it and then we send it to a lab so that we have a good understanding of what that product profile is. So there's a few different sources where you can extract humic and fulvic acids from. They're old water sediments that have humified in really extended periods of rot to the tune of hundreds of thousands of years in many cases. Where we source our product is from a material called leonardite. It's a soft brown coal. It's very nutrient rich. It's very dense. But it's not at a lignified state. So it's perceived as the optimal source for humic and fulvics. We have two separate extraction processes. So one is specific to humic acid and one specific to fulvic acid. So where this proprietary process really has created an end product that is not only really highly soluble, because we only extract into a liquid, so we don't extract, dehydrate down into a powder and then reconstitute into a liquid. We lose some of the sort of essence of what makes our product a little bit different. Our humic acid is a very high concentration, and depending on which test you run on it, and there are different tests. So if you see a percentage on a label, it really helps to understand what test that percentage was derived from. One would be a precipitate test. You're often going to see that percentage is going to be a little bit lower because it's testing for the actual carbon in that product. The other test would be a more colorimetric or spectrometry test, and that one's going to be more about light refraction. So it's about light density getting through. So you'll tend to see a higher percentage in those types of products. Some of the confusion around humic and fulvic, especially about fulvic, is there's certain regions, particularly in the States, California, that doesn't recognize fulvic acid. And so everything has to be labeled humic. And so it causes a lot of confusion when people are trying to understand, what is this product? What am I buying it for? And if they do a little bit of research and they understand they want a humic for this type of role or this function, and they want a fulvic for this function, in California, you can't identify the different products. You need to be outside of California or use a VPN so that your IP address is outside of California in order to get that material. You're not allowed to access it if you're in California, which is bizarre. Up until recently, Oregon was the same, but they've changed their tune and they've shifted. And so they now accept fulvic acid as an ingredient, and we're allowed to disclose that. But that being said, when humic acid is extracted, it's going to carry a negative charge. It's so heavy with carbon that it replicates the soil. Soil has a negative charge. Your nutrients typically will have for the most part, will have a positive charge. And it's this magnetism between that negative charge and the positive charge. So in the soil environment, your negatively charged soil is going to hold on to a certain capacity of those positively charged ions and allow for better migration into the plant. Where humic acid has a deeper negative charge, like ours has a very deep negative charge to about negative 450, you're going to hold on to a whole lot more water and nutrients. You get better water retention within the media that you're growing in, whatever it is, and you better retention of nutrients as well that the plants can then access at leisure. So fulvic acid on the other side is actually a component of the humic acid molecule, but it can also be extracted independently. It's 45% oxygen. It's a very powerful, effective chelator for such a tiny molecule, and it carries a positive charge. It has a unique ability, even though it's positively charged, to be able to hold on to positively charged ions, especially the really stubborn ones like calcium and magnesium, which adds to its benefit in a lot of plant agriculture. Again, that magnetism, that gravitation between the positive and negative, when the two are used together, there's just this magic that typically happens in the soil. You can bring that into an indoor environment. You can bring that into a hydroponic environment. You can create that relationship, and you can convince the plants that you're growing that they are in an organic matter rich environment, even if they're in a cocoa or if they're in a rock wall or if they're in a deep water culture. You convince the plant that they're in that environment and they respond accordingly, which is amazing to see. When you see that side-by-side comparison, well, that's the only difference, is that they've added humic and fulvic. To see that difference in the physiology of the plants, it's really beautiful to see. when people overlook the humic and fulvic, or if they've started to explore a humic and fulvic, it is, and I think Av, you had dropped off at this point, humic and fulvic really is the gateway biostimulant. Like if you're intimidated by the microbiology or you're intimidated by the mycorrhiza, you don't want to commit to that because you think it's too much or you might screw it up. Humic and fulvic is a really easy way to get into that side of agriculture. It brings some regenerative components into however you're growing, because it makes a big difference. And it's such a small component that can have such a big impact. So I'm always excited when people do integrate it into their system and they're like, yep, I can see it. It's night and day. It's a really exciting thing to see that transition from somebody who's been dedicated to salts, that's all they're going to do, until like, okay, maybe this is a good, like it's a stepping stone. And then they can follow a little bit farther down that path and start to explore different beneficial microbes that they can start to see that will actually improve more than just the soil, but also if they're running it through their reservoir, they can also address biofilm. They can address a lot of different things by incorporating these additives that are not just about the plant, it's about the whole ecosystem. So it's helping people sort of see outside of just plant, nourish the plant, nourish the plant. It's like you feed the soil is always intended to feed the plant. So you feed the soil will feed the plant.
It was one of the interesting things to trying to get some of the conventional growers using humic acid, and this is probably about 20 years ago, and the way I got them to use it, and I was hoping that they'd use it for its biostimulant practices, but they had reservoirs in their greenhouses. Of course, their reservoirs were transparent, and of course algae was growing in it. So I said, well, start using some humic acid. It'll give a color to the water. And of course, then they started realizing that there was no more biofilm in their emitters, and became big users of humic acid from that point. But I also wanted to just, and I don't mean this to be a plug for QuadAg products, but by all means, it is a great line of products.